The video game industry has a problem. Remember back in the day when you didn't only have your big blockbusters, you had a swath of games of more diverse genres that took risks, that were bold, that tried to break the mold and form their own. They may not have had the highest budgets of all time, but they had their own niche, and they knew what their niche was and how to capitalize on that niche. No one pretended that they were the biggest console seller of all time, but collectively, they would offer a tremendous value to you, the consumer. Consoles back in the days used to be flooded with games of this quality and of this magnitude, and it's not like these games don't exist in the modern day, but they are far fewer and farther between, at least in my own experience, than ever before. See, back in the day, you had these A games and these AA games that weren't to the par or the quality of AAA. They didn't have that size of a marketing budget. They weren't going to sell as much as AAA games, nor were they meant to. They were these own separate little experiences that flooded the scene and flooded the industry with these brave, cool ideas and trying to take what came before but to do it even better. And you see, Ratchet & Clank used to be a series like this. Ratchet & Clank back in the era of the PS2 was a rather large and beloved series, but it's not like it was PlayStation's biggest system seller of all time. But as the years went on and Ratchet & Clank inevitably made a return with the PS4, Sony tried to make Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart for the PS5 into this almost AAA experience, showing off crowd density, the fast loading times with the PS5's SSD, really trying to make Ratchet & Clank to be something that it simply was never meant to be. They tried to make Ratchet & Clank a great representation of what the PS5 is capable of, instead of just that quirky little fun third-person shooter puzzle platformer game where you just follow that little Lombax and that little machine on their nice quests. It was fun, with diverse worlds and interesting map design and a great weapon sandbox. And over the years, Sony has just doubled down more and more on trying to make every game have the success of a console seller. Now, I haven't played Rift Apart myself, but I'm sure I would enjoy it. I really did enjoy the PS4 Ratchet & Clank, for instance. Sure, it has its problems, and maybe it's not up to the quality of the originals, but I still think it was a good version of Ratchet & Clank. And Rift Apart seems like it would be a great experience, but with the recent Insomniac data breach and leak, one of the pieces of information that came out was that Rift Apart didn't have the success of a AAA game. And the issue of false expectations and unrealistic expectations is an issue that permeates society, but especially when it comes to video games, and just a lot of the times corporate suits and executives feeling out of touch when they predict or desire that these games will sell as well as, say, Call of Duty, or The Last of Us, or God of War, or any of these other bigger console-selling titles, when these series just aren't meant to be that, or they just aren't like that anymore. And if you had scaled back the budget significantly while still retaining a lot of the qualities that made the game so fun and interesting, from a gameplay perspective at least, and you maintain those qualities, but at a far decreased budget, the games would probably be way more successful, and they wouldn't take nearly as long. But it's such a weird juxtaposition compared to where Ratchet & Clank used to be, where it felt like we were inundated and flooded with these games. But more often than not, they had something new and unique to show. They were more Ratchet & Clank, sure, but they were still fun and enjoyable. But they didn't feel the need to put in all the investment that a lot of modern AAA games need. Realistically speaking, did anyone need the crowd sizes of Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart? Do I need to see the individual detail on each, fiber of fur on Ratchet & Clank? No. Have a good art style, roll with it, understand your gameplay formula, maybe try and mix it up a little bit, but try to maintain that fun and enjoyable aspect, and lean into the aspects that make the game so fun and enjoyable to begin with, without all this needless fluff surrounding it, that draws out developer time, draws up the budget, for little gain or practical gain for the consumer. And a lot of games struggle with this concept nowadays. Square Enix is notorious for this fact, where a game can sell millions of copies and still be labeled as a failure, or didn't exceed expectations, or didn't even meet expectations to begin with, and more often than not, it just feels like, well, that's a you problem. The game sold well enough for what it is, It's not like people don't like this game, but not every game is going to have mainstream success. Not every game can be slapped on the box of the console and be viewed as a console seller. That's the simple reality of the video games industry. Not everything from Microsoft will be to the hype of original Halo 1, 2, and 3. Not everything from Nintendo will have the hype of Tears and Breath of the Wild. Not everything from Sony will have the hype of The Last of Us, God of War, and Spider-Man. Some of these companies understand that better than others. I think Nintendo's in a really great space, largely because they understand they not only need to have their Breath of the Wilds and Tears of the Kingdom, but these smaller projects that are more focused in on a gameplay niche or a particular style. Hell, they still have Xenoblade Chronicles, which is nowhere near a system seller for Nintendo. Heck, the most popular title is Xenoblade 2, and that hasn't even broken 3 million, but it's my second favorite game of all time. And it's a game that can still feel like it has scale and quality to it, but still clearly does well for Nintendo, because otherwise they would have stopped the series. But instead, they've doubled down on it, because they see the value in having these series that may have the potential to break into the mainstream at some point, but right now just simply aren't. They populate your ecosystem and give your consumers more of a reason to be excited for your project and for your product. Everyone is expecting the Switch 2 this year, but Nintendo is still coming out with games that may not be to the hype or level of Tears of the Kingdom or Super Mario Wonder, but they're still giving you games like the Princess Peach game, Super Mario RPG remake, they're bringing back Paper Mario, that Mario and Donkey Kong game. Does anyone think that game's going to sell as well as Mario Wonder? I don't even think Microsoft, or not Microsoft, but Nintendo thinks that, but I don't think they went into making that game with the idea that it would sell as well as Wonder. Because obviously it wouldn't, but it's something to bolster your value proposition, to satiate your consumers, to give people an identity or the ability to find a new identity. Something new that they may love and cherish and want to double down on in the future. Nintendo understands this concept of not only having those big, heavy-hitting AAA games like Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, Super Mario Bros. Odyssey, Super Mario Wonder. Not only having games like that, but your smaller titles, those series that may be like a tier or two down in terms of popularity, but are still important to your ecosystem nonetheless. Like Fire Emblem, Xenoblade, Metroid, stuff like that, to flesh out and bolster the experience, to be able to try new things and see what new trends may form in the future. Because the video games industry can shift and pivot on a moment's notice, and when you focus all of your time on games that take 5 to 6 years of development time to even get out the door, chances are you are going to be behind the times, because you're spending all of your time developing something to fit a trend 5 to 6 years before it actually comes out. And there's nothing wrong with having these big budget AAA games. I love them myself. But when they're all you have and they all you rely on, if they miss, like Starfield or Redfall, it leaves a sour taste in the mouth of the players that is harder to change and get out. Whereas if you're on the Switch or something and say, hey, they come out with a big heavy-hitting game, but it's just not your cup of tea for whatever reason, that's fine. It's Nintendo. You probably have 10 other games coming out within the next year to satiate your desire for something new. Ratchet and Clank used to be a series like that for PlayStation. Same with Spyro and Crash Bandicoot. These titles could sell consoles by themselves, but collectively, together, they were a great value proposition for PlayStation and prospective PlayStation players. You would have all these games, all these IPs, all these ideas at your disposal. You can pick and choose what you want to play, not just hope and pray that the 1 or 2 games you're going to get for the year will satisfy your desire for games. You can argue that there's also, third-party games, but in terms of drawing eyes to your platform, having a swath of AA or even single-A games that are still quality experiences by themselves, but don't feel the need to spend like half a year developing horse testicles or whatever to try and make the game more realistic. It's Ratchet and Clank. And sure, that game doesn't have horse testicles to my knowledge. I was more alluding to Red Dead Redemption 2 there. But it's like, why were you advertising Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart as if it was supposed to be some graphical powerhouse, when Ratchet and Clank is a gameplay-focused series with a fun, lovable cast of characters in a quirky world? That's the strength of Ratchet and Clank. Sure, going through the various portals may be cool, and a decent showcase of the SSD for the PS5, but do you think Ratchet and Clank is going to break into the mainstream and garner this AAA recognition simply because you have a lot of people in the crowds, or these planets are really dense, or there's a lot of moving objects on the screen, or you can go from point A to point B really quickly? That's not the strength of Ratchet and Clank. That's not where the strength of that IP lies. And on the whole, you can just end up feeling directionless and meandering, trying to make everything conform to this very narrow point of view and this standard checkbox of things that a console seller needs to have, instead of relying on the strengths of that unique IP and what that IP can do for you, not what you can do for that IP. Having dreams and ambitions to want to propel these series higher into the spotlight is fine and all, but you have to understand where the appeal for that series came from to begin with. And when you relegate most of these IPs that people grew up with, that loved and cherished these IPs, you relegate those IPs to the wayside to focus in on and double down on these tight handful of experiences that take years and years to develop. It makes a lot of your player base feel like they're left out, or just, ignored. And when you do focus in on these IPs, you don't do so correctly or through the right viewpoint. You double down trying to make these series and these titles something they simply aren't, focusing in on details and ideas that don't add anything of substantial value to the player. That may be cool for a trailer or for advertisement, but they're just simply that. They don't make me want to spread word of mouth about the game. They don't add anything real or palpable to the experience that really bolsters it and takes it into the spotlight. And inevitably, you focus too much time and effort and money trying to make a series something that it isn't, so when it comes out and doesn't meet those lofty expectations you unrealistically hoisted upon it, you're left scratching your head wondering how this series ever gained notoriety or was talked about to begin with, when you just forgot why people liked it to begin with. Not every game that comes out on your console as a first-party title needs to be of the visual quality of the latest blockbuster AAA game. They simply don't need to. Now, do I see Sony, trying to fix this? Probably not. Microsoft has some reason to try and double down on their AA and single A sphere things with Game Pass and just bolstering that offer in terms of being a good value proposition to the consumer and prospective consumers. Sure, but Xbox for so long suffered from this effect, where they focused too much time on a few select games, and when those games came out, they were either underwhelming or just plain bad. And over time, alongside how horrific of a launch the Xbox One had, most of the market share went over to Nintendo or PlayStation. And Nintendo and PlayStation kind of largely deal with separate audiences. Sure, they're both gaming companies, and sure, some people probably made the decision between one or the other, but with the success that PlayStation has had recently, they're not sweating anything. Why would they? Sure, there was that report from that data breach from Insomniac that said they worry about Xbox in the future, but that still requires Xbox to actually come out with great games, which they still need to prove that they can still do. And if that competition never materializes from Xbox, well then PlayStation simply in no need to focus in on these smaller projects. They don't need to bolster the offerings of the PS5 when there's nothing to try and weigh that value against. Because I can sit here and say that if I'm looking at both consoles, I think the Xbox is slightly ahead in terms of having the option for a cheaper console, a more expensive console. I think Game Pass is a better deal than whatever PlayStation has. I think Game Pass as well is a better deal as well. None of that matters if you don't have the games. Nintendo has achieved massive market dominance because they have great hardware that is hybridization focused, that is cheap, and they have a swath of games you can play. They have all the important stuff. They have the hardware and they have the software to boot. So what if Nintendo Online isn't as good? They have the games. Their hardware is cheap, easily accessible, and you can play it in a bunch of different ways. Nintendo focused in on the important aspects of a game console, and we have seen how successful they have been because of that. PlayStation's MO lately, as I've talked about before, has to change only if Xbox actually steps up their game. If not, all PlayStation has to do is have some version of what their competitors have and then just continue to pump out great games. I would love to see them pump out more games that have lesser budgets, with different ideas that focus more in on a singular concept and try and do that concept really well instead of these massive, big cinematic experiences. But if they don't have any financial reason to do so, they're a company, they're not going to do it. But if Xbox gets their act together and realizes, hey, we have a bunch of IP here, we can start pumping out games of varying budgets. We're going to have a triple A's, we're going to have a double A's, we're going to have a single A's, and they start pumping those games out, and they start to be of high quality, and people enjoy them and like them, then maybe this will become a more important concept for Sony. We'll have to see, though. But with that, I think I'll call the video there for the day. Thank you all for tuning in. My pleasure for making the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Stay safe, have a great day. Leave a comment down below with an IP or a game that you used to love that has just gotten absolutely no attention lately. I'd love to hear your thoughts and to hear your stories. Stay safe, have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody. Until we meet again.